So today I thought I would do a Reading Rage ink on something that means something to me because I have played drums a little bit back in the day when I was younger for a good long chunk of my life. So far, I guess not that long, but 7 years, I feel. Oh my god, my cat. This is my cat, and he wants to make a little cameo. He wants to make a little catio. And are you okay? Is it okay? Can I do this right now, or should I not do this? He's a little sick right now. I just ordered his medicine, so we're gonna get him his medicine. And like always, I'm a pet mom, I'm a caregiver, so there's gonna be a lot of things going on. So this is why Karen Carpenter matters. So not all Karens are Karens. And if you've ever seen her sing and perform at the same time, on a set, no doubt, so moving your feet, moving your hands, moving your mouth, you know, in front of people, no doubt, is, it's something that's very difficult, right? So, I would have to, in marching band, I would have to, one, learn how to play my music, but make sure that it was, like a single brain with the other drummers on the line. And then, hey, hi, how are you? I'm going to read this book. And then as you're drumming, you know, you have to have your footwork correct and then remember where you're moving, right? Because everything is very choreographed. Your left hand plays 5 beats in conjunction with the right hand. And so if you start on your right instead of on your left, and you're used to starting on your left, then you're not going to end up on the cymbal that you want to end up on, or vice versa. I mean, that's why you practice the way you're going to perform. So there's a lot to it, much more than that, right? And so I just wanted to say that if you've ever seen videos of her performing, it's incredible. And so I'm just going to start. Thanks so much for being here. What's up? Let me wait. I'm not really good at paying attention to people while I'm trying to read, but I'm just going to read this. It's actually from Texas State Press. And I got this at the San Antonio Public Library Book Festival, whatever it's called. And I saw them there, and I was able to get a few really amazing books, and this is just going to be one of them. It's actually by Karen Tongson and the University of Texas Press of Austin. So thanks, UT. It was copyrighted in 2019. And the second print happened in 2020, in case any of y'all know. And it's to Jose Esteban Munoz, who passed away in 2013, for pointing me to the queer horizon. It's awesome. And like usual, if you've never seen my Reading Rage lives, I am reading this for the first time, so go easy on me. I don't know if I'm going to save this one. We'll figure it out as this goes on. I'm not going to read it all, but it's not that long of a book, so I'm excited to see where it goes. I will admit I read like the first sentence of the preface, and just to make sure it was okay, and here we are. So, preface. Unlike many other young icons of rock and pop lost to overdoses under dramatic circumstances, from Janis Joplin to Jimi Hendrix to Jim Morrison, Karen Carpenter faded out slowly, just like the music she and her brother, Richard, were known for making together as the Carpenters. One might even describe her death in 1983 as a protracted suicide aided by her underconsumption, the refusal to eat and nourish her body, as opposed to the ruckus excesses and overconsumption so characteristic of other rock stars. Stories of demise. In this book, I revisit the events of Karen's life and death, not in an effort to retrace history or to speculate on how this could have happened, but instead to explore the different afterlives generated by her music and her voice in far-flung settings, including in our fantasy worlds. Karen Carpenter matters, I argue, because we transformed the uneventful in her life, work, and even death into something extraordinary. Volumes of work, biographies, academic articles, think pieces, before such things as think pieces existed, have been devoted to the Carpenters, the brother-sister duo whose storied rise to the top of the charts and the top of the world coincided with Richard Nixon's America and a worldview that staunchly held on to an attitude of Sunbelt optimism, despite the international and domestic turmoil caused by the Vietnam War. Why Karen Carpenter matters delves into some of the scenes of the Carpenters' suburban upbringing, an international outlook to their story and their musical body of work. I focus on Karen Carpenter and not the duo known as the Carpenters, precisely because it is Karen's iconicity, due in no small part to her tragic early death and haunting contralto voice. She resulted in their music's enduring appeal in the United States and abroad. This book delves not only into the band's movements through time and space, but more specifically into the myths surrounding Karen Carpenter's voice, which eventually became reanimated through other bodies and other voices in the Philippines, my birthplace, and elsewhere through brown bodies, queer bodies, differently abled bodies. All this said, this book is not a comprehensive biography or even an extended social history about Karen or the Carpenters and every album they recorded or every venue where they may have performed. There are lengthier, more extensive volumes to turn to for that level of thoroughness. Instead, this book, like so many other work, is inspired by something the Victorian aesthete and writer Walter Pater once wrote in the preface to his 1873 book, The Renaissance. He asks, why is this song or picture, this engaging personality presented in life or in a book to me? What effect does it really produce on me? A good portion of this book is devoted to answering Pater's questions about music, lives, and engaging personalities, and exploring why Karen Carpenter matters to me. You see, my Filipino musician parents named me after Karen Carpenter in 1973. Karen is my namesake, and her voice and music are coordinates in the musical mapping of my family's journey across the Pacific, between big cities like Manila and the sprawl of Southern California, and between old-fashioned notions of romance and the queer desires that come to surface despite the Carpenters' milk with toast musical fantasies about normal love. So you know right off the bat what I really like about what we read so far, which is just a few pages. This sentence calls out to me. This book delves not only into the band's movements through time and space, but more specifically into myths surrounding Karen Carpenter's voice, which eventually became reanimated through other bodies and other voices in the Philippines, my birthplace, and elsewhere. Through brown bodies, queer bodies, differently abled bodies. So, right off the bat, this Karen, the author Karen, is cognizant of language. So important. And you can tell within the first few paragraphs of this book how well educated and socially aware and attuned to people that this person is. I can only hope that one day I will or can be in such a way like that with my words. And the way that they speak about time and space, how this music is a teaching to different cultures and how it's traveled and affected different cultures. And then they talk about worldwide versus them personally going from their own journey, right? And the immigration of their family. And then what that means as far as their body immigrating from what's normal to finding themselves, right? And how the Carpenters, though they spoke about what was normal, more than likely heteronormative love, it meant so much more, and it became so much more, and she was so much more than that. So I already am just completely impressed with Karen Tongsen, and let's go on. Also, sorry, my dog was eating earlier, and you might have heard her chewing really loudly. Sorry about that. It'll happen probably again. That was her breakfast. She never eats breakfast, and I always put it out for her. She doesn't eat it. Anyways, doesn't matter. It's not about that. Okay. Karen Carpenter matters to me because I was nurtured on the idea that my mother, who is also a lead singer, sounded like Karen Carpenter. My mother christened me Karen when I was born in Manila, 5 years before we sought our fortunes in the United States for the first time. Karen Carpenter is at once my blessing and my burden. The Philippines is often depicted as a kind of sonic mirror of the United States because of its robust history of cover bands who imitated American pop styles ever since the U.S. liberated the island nation in World War II. The relationship between American and Filipino pop culture is an intimate one because of the U.S. military presence in the country and the influence of media like the Armed Forces Radio on the nation's taste and entertainment culture. Karen Carpenter matters to Filipinos and Filipino Americans like me, whose movements through the megalopolis of Manila to and from the Philippines' rural provinces, and eventually to distant places for overseas labor, are scored to Karen's voice, one redolent of tears, even when she sings about unbridled joy. Why Karen Carpenter matters in other words, is not about why others have thought the Carpenters mattered as an American pop group who helped spawn soft rock, though this fact is of the utmost importance, or as the most avowedly good-for-shoes pop act to rule the charts. Oh, goody 4 shoes instead of goody 2 shoes. I wish I had gotten that right when I first read it. Anyways, or as the most avowedly goody 4 shoes pop act to rule the charts. Instead, why Karen Carpenter matters is about why Karen matters to people of color, immigrants, queer people, gender outlaws, and every other than the white Nixon-era suburbanites she and her music are said to have represented. In order to make this case, the book reaches through and between real and conjured histories, memories false and true, born of cross-culture tales of affection, aggression, and an abiding longing. Why Karen Carpenter matters will move between the Southern California suburbs, where the duo's signature Spectrum sound was cultivated amidst a chain of stores and defense plants, like the one Agnes Carpenter, Karen's mother, worked in the Philippines, where I was bestowed with the name Karen. Southern California's suburbs became my own family's destination, inspired in part by a dream of yesterday's once more. The radio traces of a good life that has since receded into memory, or perhaps never was. Combining memoir with history, don't cuss, don't say that at home, kids. Combining memoir with history, critical and creative geographies, musical analysis, queer theory, and on occasion, self-analysis. Why Karen Carpenter Matters explores the ties that bind artists and listeners beyond families and fandoms. This is the preface. We just finished it. Congratulations you, congratulations moi. More congratulations you if you actually watch this, because I know it's a hot mess over here. So good for you for hanging in there. All right. Should we read one more chapter? I think so. At least let's see how far we get. And by we, I mean me. Okay. So, did I hit the live button? Imagine. I'm like just talking. It's not recording. No, it is. It's recording. Okay. Chapter 1. Whiteness and Promises. On February 4th, 1983, Karen Carpenter died of complications from anorexia nervosa while she was reaching for a fuzzy bathrobe in the bedroom closet at her parents' mid-century suburban home in Downey, California. Jesus. Started the chapter out strong, huh? By all accounts, Ray Coleman's 1994 biography, chief among them, Karen spent the day before she died cruising between suburban chain stores, looking for sturdy household items like a washer or dryer at the Downey Gemco, a big box store absorbed by Target in the mid-1980s that she affectionately referred to as the Gucci of Downey. She ate a shrimp salad for dinner with her parents at Bob's Big Boy and picked up a couple of tacos to go from a local joint next door so she could snack on them while she indulgently in the made-for-TV spectacle of a manscaped, micro-kimono-clad Richard Chamberlain in Shogun. Everyone thought she was on the mend. The very picture of SoCal suburbanity in repose, eating tacos and watching the tube all night before what was supposed to be another sunshiny day in an endless season, nay, a lifetime of sunniness. It's kind of depressing. But I can endure for you. On the other side of the Pacific, a mere stone's throw from the land of Shogun and newfangled devices like sing-along karaoke machines, I learned about Karen Carpenter's death in the waiting room of a dubious travel agency in Little Ongpin, Manila's old Chinatown district. I was 9 years old, stuck there with my musician parents. They were making arrangements for our departure from the Philippines, where I was born, to the dry heat of Southern California, where my white stepfather grew up just 50 miles east of Downey in a region called the Inland Empire, a place with its own aerospace and defense plants nestled between the citrus groves and the stucco. Karen Carpenter dies at 32, screamed the newsprint just above the fold of a Filipino newspaper discarded on the cracked, moist, naugahyde bench next to me. Even though my body had slackened while I was sweating it out in the tropical density of that miserable waiting room, cooled only intermittently by a half-cocked electric fan, my spine went stiff as soon as my eyes grazed that headline. Sus Mariosep, I cursed in my head. My namesake is dead, and she died young at 32. A year younger than Jesus himself. At 9 going on 10, I was just growing into my fear of mortality, which was aggravated by the fact that we were about to take another epic trans-Pacific journey on a jet, packed with people chain-smoking duty-free Dunhills. At least this was how I remembered my first flight to the States when I was 5. I also recalled the oxygen mask dropping somewhere past Guam, and my mother setting her half-drawn cigarette in a tiny armrest ashtray before strapping the mask over my face. My family, compromising mostly professional musicians, made a lot out of the fact that I was named after Karen Carpenter instead of a relative, saint, or some other Catholic luminary. My grandfather and his brothers, Romy, Katendig, and the High Chords, were credited with innovating Latin jazz in the Philippines in the 50s and 60s. My mom, whose stage name is Maria, carried on the family business, briefly singing in OPM, original Filipino music. I wonder if that's a spelling error? Did they typo that, or is that something I'm not culturally aware of? Acts in the 1970s with supergroups like Counterpoint and the Circus Band, before falling in love and forming a touring jazz combo with my stepfather, a California-born, Hawaii-based musician named Jimmy Dykes. His Pacific Rim roots landed him gigs and some of the top Filipino performers of the 1970s. With some of those top Filipino performers of the 1970s, including one of my mom's godfathers, crooner Roberto Bert Nievera, from the Society of Seven. My mother's voice was often compared to Karen Carpenter's when both of them were in their prime, so Karen was like family, but more of a distant relative whose resemblance felt significant even if it was only circumstantial, and whose global accomplishments were touted aspirational for my musical clan, Karen Carpenter, superstar. Even before she died in 1983, Karen fulfilled something of a spiritual role in our home of Manila. Like the friendly ghosts of our neighborhood, curandera claimed to have found living in our duatry, and with whom my grandmother, Linda Kattendig, tried to negotiate one evening after several hours of mahjong and too many bottles of San Miguel beer. She asked the mother-daughter spirits not to manifest in front of us, lest they actually scare us to death, even as she acknowledged and respected their own claims to residency and tacitly accepted their ubiquity. Karen, too, was everywhere. In the late night sing-songs around the water-damaged upright piano on the veranda, in the cook's whistled refrains of Top of the World, and in my name. But most of the time, as the song goes, it was just the radio. I challenge anyone visiting the Philippines, now or then, to try to last a day, nay, several hours, without hearing a Carpenter song on the radio, or in a karaoke establishment, or performed by a cover band. Though there aren't any charts to prove definitively that the Carpenters were more popular in the Philippines than in any other nation in the world, their enduring presence on Filipino radio and in Filipino-American karaoke repertoires attests to my people's profound affinity with this most wholesome of American duos. After all, the Carpenters famously crooned that Nixon's White House during West German Chancellor Willy Brandt's state visit, while our neighbors in Southeast Asia were ablaze in napalm, and our own would-be dictator, Ferdinand Marcos, was declaring martial law. Their Now and Then album from 1973, the same year my teen parents, who met performing in a Manila concert production of Jesus Christ Superstar, Chris and Me Karen, has been clocked by Tom Smucker as one of the greatest pop music explorations of whiteness in the last half century. You know what I also really like about this book, sorry I couldn't stop myself from saying something, is the little historical facts. And how important it is to show that immigrants move to get refuge in other places. Immigrants move to be working citizens most of the time. Sure, you're going to have your outliers, but immigrants from all over the world move for a better life, or a life that's different, a life with more resources. Immigrants move to be safe, to get away from violent dictatorships. Immigrants are amazing people that have to endure great journeys and great problems to get a better life or a different life. And they have the bravery to at least try, and are some of the hardest working people. I have family that immigrated, like probably most of all of us that live in America. Unless you're Native American, you had someone in your line that wasn't originally from America. So the fact that this book, in this time that we're living in, maybe in all the times that we've ever lived in, talks about how important moving is for immigrants, how hard and talented her family was, how they were famous in the Philippines, but they still came to America. It's important. It's important to show that how family-oriented people are that are immigrants, how hardworking they are, how talented they are. How she's making a book about a goody four-shoes brother and sister act. That's enough, I think, for now. But anyways, so I'll continue. The Carpenters' westward migration from New Haven, Connecticut to Downey, California, a white working-class suburban conveniently situated between Orange County and Los Angeles. Oh, suburban. I thought I was going to say suburban neighborhood. So, blah, 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 would seem to affirm this narrow trajectory toward whiteness and promises. To invoke a Filipino karaoke machine that misinterpreted the line about white lace and promises in We've Only Just Begun. Both the original lyric and the error are essentially referring to the same thing. An American suburban fantasy of the good life with a good wife. Sharing horizons that are new to us, but not foreign or strange in the grander scheme of things. Familiar. Comfortable. Just as things should be. Or at least as we've always pretend we want them to be. As Smucker writes, control and precision often assigned as white musical values. An elaborate pop production that implies a kind of mass affluence locate the Carpenters' soft rock in the suburban world abstracted on the Now and Then album cover, end quote. It's easy enough now for scholars, historians, and music critics like Smucker to point out the 2020 hindsight, how harmless the Carpenters were, implying that Karen, Richard, and their team were blithely unselfconscious about the incompatibility of their goody four-shoes image with the zenith of late 1960s counterculture. The Carpenters came to prominence during a particularly tumultuous era in the United States, both musically and politically. In the wake of the Summer of Love, Woodstock, and the escalation of the war in Vietnam, Karen's voice described the detractors of saccharine, and champions by others a distinctly smooth or velvety, began to dominate the airwaves, and both nostalgic reflections and optimistic projections about better times crafted for only yesterdays. Mired in the Watergate scandal and with his days in office numbered, Richard Nixon took the opportunity to take a break from his legal and political woes to describe the duo as young America at its best. Richard Carpenter chafed at the creepy wholesomeness of their image, and in particular at how A&M Records marketed the duo in soft focus. Vaguely romantic poses among jutting rocks on picturesque seashores, the Close to You cover looks like a Valentine's card. We're not sweethearts. End quote. He complained in a 2002 BBC documentary, Close to You, the story of the Carpenters. Sure, the music itself is mostly romantic. From the first blush of affection, wanton anthropomorphism in They Long to Be Close to You, to enduring love's auspicious commencement in We've Only Just Begun. But the messengers, Richard insisted, felt he had to insist. We're not. In the same BBC documentary, John Bettis, Richard's lyricist, the songwriting partner, unabashedly declared that in 1970, the year the Carpenters first topped the charts, everybody was dying to be something they weren't. Everybody was dying to be from the ghetto. Everybody was dying to not be from the suburbs. The fact of the matter was that we were who we were. We were white, middle-class American kids. And we wrote like that. Sang like that. We dressed like that. We lived like that. ... Needless to say, my musical family is not like that. Despite the Despite the belated addition of my Southern Californian stepfather to the mix, by the time I was born in 1973, the Catendigs were genteel, post-provincial, post-World War II Manileños, or Manila-dwelling prototypes for what we now call the bourgeois boheme. Hedonistic artists with some capitalist success and an aspirational, rather spendy sensibility. Unlike the middle-class American white kids who Betty speculates are drawn to the authenticating grit of a ghetto past, the Catendigs were made every effort to transpose their war-torn, provincial, Pampanagan origins and their scrappy upbringing in the working-class Manila neighborhood of Obrero Tondo into a hip, internationalist Latin jazz sound for the finest lounges and cocktail bars of the Southeast Asia and even the United States. In 1970, the year the Carpenters released their first #1 single, They Long to Be Close to You, my grandfather, Rami Catendig, and his brothers, the High Chords, were performing regularly in Las Vegas, as his younger brother Eddie, the vibraphone and sax player, who eventually came to be known as the Kenny G of the Philippines, noted in an interview for a book called Pinoy Jazz Traditions, quote, "This was about 1969, and we were playing all over America for 4 years. We would do a lot of shows. We fronted for Count Basie's big band, and also for Peter Nero. The Tropicana Hotel in Las Vegas was one of our puestos, regular venues." End quote. Ooh, they opened for Count Basie's big band. Shit, her grandfather was famous, man. And then, what was I gonna say? Oh, a vibraphone. Okay, so for y'all non-music folk, I'll just say, a vibraphone is, I'm all excited because I was a percussionist. Picture a xylophone, right? Those things that you hit with the mallets, and they have the keys. It looks like a piano, but with wood blocks, right? Picture a xylophone, except instead of the wood block keys, it's metal keys. So they're metal, and then like a marimba, which is just a bigger version of a xylophone, but it has tubes underneath the metal blocks. So the vibraphone, obviously the marimba has wooden blocks that you play on, has reverberators, it has tubes underneath, and it gives them like a larger sound, I would say. And there's a pedal you can step on, just like the organ, like the piano organ, and it will hold the note that you play out longer. And then when you take your foot off of the pedal, it dampens the note. So just like when you see a cymbal player crash on a cymbal, I'm getting too excited about this. When you see a cymbal player crash on a cymbal and then they grab the cymbal with their hands to dampen it. So it's like, you know, that's the same thing, but with a pedal and with metal keys. So it's like a marimba, but it's slightly shorter. And marimbas can be like, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They can be like around 5 feet. Like 4 feet, 4.5 feet. Anyways, marimbas are slightly shorter than that. They have metal keys, the metal blocks that you play on, and they still have the reverberators, the like tubes underneath it. And they still have the pedal, so you can hold the note out for a long time. And you can play it with 2 mallets, or you can play it with 4 mallets, 2 mallets in each hand. Maybe there's people that do 6 mallets, but I only was able to go up to 4. So, anyways, that's a vibraphone. The more you know. Okay. So, we are over here. So the Carpenters played the nearby sands and Riviera, and part of me wonders if either family ensemble ever noticed the other others gigging on the strip, even like unconsciously in passing. At the very least, I fantasized that my grandfather knew and cared about who the Carpenters were and would keep an eye out because his teenage daughter was such a huge fan. But as with most things having to do with this charming man, his attentiveness to his daughter's interests, especially from half a world away, is likelier to have flourished in fantasy than in reality. My grandmother, who remained in the Philippines, it's a Freudian slip, sorry, in the Philippines, with my mom and my uncle during Rami's year on the road, was highly educated mestiza from Iloilo in the Visayas. Linda Oñas was born to Juan Oñas, a U.S. naval officer of Spanish-Filipino descent, and his devoutly Catholic wife, Salud. My great-grandfather, Juan, died of tuberculosis before World War II, leaving Salud to raise their 2 daughters, Linda and Melly, on her own. Together, these 3 fled through Visayan rice fields, ducking Japanese bullets, while concealing the ceremonial American flag bequeathed to Salud by the U.S. Navy after Juan's death. She eventually dismantled the Stars and Stripes, both burdensome and dangerous, in her possession, and repurposed the fabric as school dresses for my grandmother and great-aunt during the colonial occupation. After the war, the Oñas women moved to Manila, where my grandmother, Linda, met Rami Kattendig in the early 1950s. She fancied herself a gal about town because she held an urbane secretarial job, thinking Peggy Olson in Mad Men, the TV show, of which she was particularly proud. Not the secretary Peggy Olson in Mad Men, her secretarial job. Just wanted to clarify that. Rami, whose given name was Romeo, is entirely too apt, was the pianist and arranger for a radio show that recorded live in the big city park, Luneta, now Rizal Park. Rizal? I don't know. Rizal Park. We'll call it Rizal. Near my grandmother's corporate office. Don't get any ideas. You know who I'm talking to. Anyways. They met during one of her lunch breaks, and though she was suspicious of his caddish charms, they eventually ended up marrying in a proper Catholic wedding at Salud's insistence after my mother had already been conceived. My mom, christened Elizabeth before she adopted her stage name Maria for the business called Show, inherited my grandmother's poised mestiza femininity and my grandfather's drive for musical adventure and stardom. When we first visited the Southern California suburbs in 1978, about 5 years before we would eventually settle there, I could tell she was disoriented by not moving easily through this new environment with an air of specialness and privilege. She possessed, if not exactly whiteness, a light-skinned middle-classness that she and my grandmother wielded so well in Manila, only to be confronted in Riverside, California, with a working-class American suburban whiteness neither of us quite understood, let alone knew how to navigate. So that's really interesting. They're talking about like white passing, right? When you're white passing, but you're not white, like myself. I'm obviously not super dark-skinned. And how, if you've ever read The Fragility of Whiteness, or White Fragility, oh, shit, I don't remember, I think it's White Fragility, and it's a book about how Black, Indigenous people of color have to work with people that are white, right? And how they need to learn, and how, and what can we as Black, Indigenous people of color do to help or not, and who needs to start that conversation. I read it like 3.5 years ago or so I'm just paraphrasing, and there's so much more to it. But I remember one part is where it says people that are white passing, right? They're still Black, Indigenous people of color, but have lighter skin than their counterparts, their relatives, their friends, their people in their culture. We get a certain, whether you know it consciously or subconsciously, we get a certain privilege. We can move in social circles and areas where sometimes other people cannot. And how it can be used for privilege, right? And just the fact that she's calling her family out on it. I mean, she's not shy about it. She's putting it all out there. So I think that's super important for people to look at, because it's something that she's first saying, like judging her own family first, right? Like calling herself out in order for people to have self-reflection and think about, oh shoot, do I do that? Or has that ever happened to me, right? Even as an other, right? Because we're others. Even as an other, how or do we have privilege because of certain things, even within the other spectrums? So I think that's important. And she doesn't like dwell on it, right? Or like even call it out. But in her narrative, she points it out. So I don't know. I just think that's important. So, my mother was stunned when the neighborhood kids encircled me on her soon-to-be mother-in-law's neatly clipped lawn to ask what I was, where I came from, and whether or not I was Christian. When I responded that I was Filipino and Catholic, these nasty little inquisitors asked if I ate people and knew how to use a toilet. They also told me Catholics aren't Christians. Evangelical Christianity at its densest. My white soon-to-be grandmother, Marion Dykes, shooed them away with a sternness and gravitas I came to understand later as a holdover from her deeply ingrained mid-century decency. I appreciated her sense of decorum in those kinds of situations, though I never could keep my elbows properly off the table during dinners at home, which usually involved stewed tomatoes and other items peculiar to my young Filipino palate, with my preference for the charred, fatty parts of grilled meats. My mother was only 15 in 1970, when the Carpenters' album Close to You went platinum, in the United States and across the globe. She began to sing her repertoire in her earliest co-ed vocal groups around the same time. These groups were inspired stylistically by the Carpenters' cultivation of a pop choral sound, which could be described as next-level fifth dimension. More complex key changes, more intricate jazz harmonies, which matched well with my mother's own musical heritage. By the time I was born, several years later, my namesake Karen and the Carpenters were ensconced firmly at the top of the charts, and my mother, too, hit her stride in her career. From 1970 to 1973, the Carpenters had notched hit album after hit album from their eponymous 1971 follow-up to Close to You. Where am I? Oh, to my soundtrack In Utero. And the 1972 masterpiece A Song for You, which boasted some of their most enduring single hits, including Top of the World, Hurting Each Other, Goodbye to Love, and I Won't Last a Day Without You. Damn, that sounds like the last week of my life. Just kidding. So Mom's singing career was derailed ever so slightly by my impending birth and a brief tumultuous marriage to my biological father, a tenor named Henry Tongson, who also adored Karen Carpenter's voice. It was inevitable. I'd be baptized as Karen by these 18-year-old parents and superfans who met singing in the circus band, one of the Manila's hottest acts, known for performing more than the occasional Carpenters cover. Okay, I'm gonna drink a little water because I am very hot. Okay. Once this Karen made her way into the world, she's talking about herself, into Manila newly under the thumb of Ferdinand Marcos's martial law, the Oñas matriarchy, which was reconstituted in the late 1960s after Rami Kattendig absconded with one of his overseas lovers, circled the wagons. My grandmother, my great-grandmother, and my great-aunt helped raise me, as they had raised my mom. While Maria took a choice gig performing nightly at a Tony supper club called The Top of the Hilton with the Chordsband, it was several years into her residency at The Top that she met Jimmy Dykes, the musical director for Bert Bert Nievera's touring show, who shared the bill with her act for a better part of a year. Like my mother's father, her younger brother, and the self-described piano picker, Richard Carpenter, Jimmy was a pianist and arranger. By 1977, just as the Carpenters seemed to be losing their platinum magic with experimental forays into proggy futurism, like calling occupants of interplanetary craft, parentheses, the recognized anthem of World Contact Day, end quote, my mom and soon-to-be stepdad were taking copious couple photos around Manila's landmarks in matching astrology tees and denim bell-bottoms. He's a Leo. Aren't we all, baby? She's an Aries. Unbeknownst to me, I was barely past toddlerdom at the time. Our own westward trajectory to the Southern California suburbs was being set into motion, and they wanted to remember Manila when they left. dot, dot, dot. In Carpenter's lore, Harold and Agnes Carpenter moved to Southern California in 1963 to jumpstart Richard's musical career. Karen and Richard's cousin, Joan Panisi, verifies this in another BBC documentary, this one from 2007, The Carpenter's Story, Only Yesterdays. Quote, I think Richard's parents, Agnes and Harold, were beginning to feel that Richard really had talent, and there's two places you should go if you have musical talent. Either New York, California. Noticeably irked by the foregrounding of his personal ambitions and accounts of the family's recollection, Richard complained in the same documentary, quote, the story is that they moved here to further my career, but the number one reason is that my dad wanted to get the hell out of the cold. End quote. Both well-known Carpenters biographers, Ray Coleman and Randy Schmidt, Helly, stop doing that. No. Hey. Shh. Hey. Don't make me go over there. Sorry. Both well-known Carpenters biographers, Ray Coleman and Randy Schmidt, corroborate Richard's protestations, though it's clear his career potential could never quite be subtracted from any of the family's equations. As Schmidt writes, quote, in addition to their quest for a milder climate, the Carpenter parents saw California, and especially Hollywood, as a place where Richard's dreams of becoming a famous pianist would have a better chance of coming true. You want me to help you up, or you got it? Okay. Oh, well, I was just asking. You got it. You got it. I didn't mean to embarrass you. All right. Sorry. So sorry. So Karen, who was 13 at the time of their at the time of their California sojourn, wasn't particularly keen on leaving behind her close-knit circle of friends and cousins in New Haven, Connecticut. Despite the debilitating stage fright we've come to associate with Karen at the height of the Carpenter's stardom, she was, by all accounts, a socially gregarious child and adolescent in New Haven, and she preferred more robust amusements than her introverted music geek brother. She remarked once in an interview, quote, while Richard was listening to music in the basement, I was out playing baseball and football and playing with my machine gun. Holy fuck balls. She didn't say holy fuck balls. I said holy fuck balls. Playing with my machine gun. I was very tomboyish. Quite a character, I hear. End quote. Her friends, family, and neighbors described Karen as a freewheeling tomboy who reveled in roughhousing outdoors and playing with plastic weaponry instead of dolls. Okay, wait. Though I am a tomboy, and I'm all for tomboys, and I had a friend send me an article about tomboys. I wish I had it on me so I could kind of read that through and how semiotics changed the meaning through time and what it did mean and what it means now and what it really meant, and it was very interesting. I can't remember right at this moment, so I'm not going to say anything to that articles, but I do want to say something about playing with your machine gun. Okay, if you're a kid, even if you're not a kid, having a machine gun isn't necessary. It's not necessary to have an automatic rifle, okay? You're not going to go shoot a bear with an automatic rifle, with an automatic machine gun. You don't need that. Kids don't need that. Adults don't need that. Sure, I'm for being a gun-carrying person who's had a background check, who has a great teacher and trainer and has been certified to carry that weapon, that is intelligent and knows, intelligent as far as gun facts, and has emotional stability that they can carry a gun for themselves and for the others around them. Right? And I understand there's so many ghost guns, and that's a totally different story, right? Like, even if we were to get all of these psychological evaluations, I mean, obviously, who's doing these evaluations? How credible are they? Are they just going to start only giving certain people, like, authorization to carry guns? So that's a whole different thing, right? But just having a good, strong trainer and a certification to carry and a background check is it's wildly important. Gun laws make safe gun owners. I'm not saying take away people's guns. Heck no. I think owning guns is your right, but it's also the world's right, and especially the United States. It's our right to make sure that if you own a gun, that I'm safe. That you have your certification, that you're a registered gun holder, that you've been through a training, hopefully multiple, and that you're emotionally stable, so you have a background check, and we know that you're not depressed and going to go off the deep end and, like, accidentally use that gun in a situation that you shouldn't be. And to make sure that you don't have a semi-auto or an automatic rifle or an AK, that you're going to go into a place and something bad's going to happen. You know what I mean? Like, God forbid you unalive someone because you're depressed and you didn't have your meds because you don't have health care because people have to pay through the nose to get their medicine in this freaking the United States of America. Because Big Pharma controls everything. So it's like those poor people who are chemically imbalanced may have been given a gun, and unfortunately their health care ran out and they can't pay for it. But the United States isn't going to give them health care. So, like, all of these things, and they go out and they have this weapon that you don't even have to reload, like a shotgun or a rifle. That you have to do the thing and you cock it back. You could just go do. And then by the time you know it, you unalive a whole bunch of people. Your friends, your family, my friends, my family, God forbid. God forbid. No, I mean, what the hell did Karen Carpenter need a goddamn machine gun for? Okay, so sorry, I'm not saying anything bad about Karen Carpenter, but nah, like, let's just be honest about that, right? Let's just talk about that for a second. Okay, now we can get back to the book, for Pete's sake. Her friends, family, and neighbors described Karen as a freewheeling tomboy who reveled in roughhousing outdoors and playing with plastic weaponry instead of dolls. Oh, it was plastic. I apologize, Karen Carpenter, rolling around in your grave. You're like, it wasn't a real machine gun. Well, that was for people that do have real machine guns, for Pete's sake, and automatic weapons. Let's go back to this story. In a middle school autobiography assignment she wrote right before their big move to California, Karen proudly recounted how she acquired a nasty injury after falling from a trapeze when she was little. She even maintained a morning paper route to earn extra spending money, which Richard noted was different. Poking fun at his own dorky, physically inept image, quote, bad knees and all, Richard's solo number, Piano Picker, from their 1972 album, A Song for You, flips the script on his teenage abjection by explaining how his lack of athleticism is why he became such a consummate pianist. Quote, yes, after years and years of practice and a case of real bad knees, while the other guys were out playing with the football, I was home banging on the keys. The Carpenter siblings' modest, if strangely frequent, confessions of adolescent gender nonconformity draw little commentary from most biographers and cultural observers. There is, however, the notable exception of filmmaker Todd Haynes' campy insinuations about the duo's perversity in his experimental video shot entirely with Barbie dolls, Superstar, the Karen Carpenter story in 1987. Richard successfully sued Haynes for copyright infringement, driving the film underground, where it accrued cult status through its illicit circulation and consumption. Beyond the question of copyright, Haynes and his co-writer, Cynthia Schneider, obviously touched a nerve. One barely subcutaneous, radiating with a familiar ache to queer listeners and fans of the Carpenters, like me. Simply put, there's something totally queer about the Carpenters, beyond the mere fact that Karen's tomboyish youth of penchant for percussion, beyond Richard's preference for banging on the keys instead of playing with girlfriends, beyond even the missteps in A&M's marketing, which implicitly framed the siblings as sweethearts. Haynes' film begins by asking how a smooth-voiced girl from Downey, California, led a ruckus nation smoothly into the 70s. Its opening sequences scored to the song oh God bless America in the sorry, I apologize. You should read it, it's good. I'm not doing it justice. In its opening sequences scored the blank blank, scored to the song, the film. Why am I reading that a weird way? Bloop, 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 bloop. Okay, in its opening sequences. I'm gonna read it real fast so I get it through. Scored to the song, the film is named after Superstar. Haynes' camera guides us across Southern California's subdivided tracts of ranch-style homes. Capacious. Does anybody else think ranch-style beans when they think of that? Is that just me? One too many as a kid, you know what I'm saying? Kicking back the ranch-style bean cans. Capacious carports and 3-car garages. The film invites a deeper look not only at the psychological forces behind Karen Carpenter's untimely death, but also at the unseemly analog grit of the white working-class suburbs southeast of Los Angeles in which she eventually came of age. A landscape of grainy days and Mondays, as film scholar Lucas Hildebrand describes in his article on Superstar's bootleg aesthetics. Haynes' film creatively speculates about the Carpenter family's pathologies, from their mother's controlling nature to Karen's anorexia nervosa to whispers about Richard's private life and sexuality. One needn't even raise the question about whether Richard and Karen were ever gay. Ample evidence points to the fact that they were not. To understand how very queerly their aberrant normalcy might resonate with others who might also feel fearful of making mistakes in such a master plan scenario, others for whom one wrong move could undo everything so carefully wrought, so hard won. Quote, it takes a long time for it to sink in. There are all these habits you've been brought up with all your life. You don't just go plowing through the store buying everything you like. End quote. Richard explained after describing his and Karen's stunned response to their first massive royalty check after the success of Close to You. The Carpenters' working class upbringing and the accompanying sense that it could all go away at any moment without the next hit, the next perfectly calibrated melody, the next sold-out tour, resulted in an anxious perfectionism in their recording practice that was most succinctly captured in an attempt for the Southeast News in 1971. On the eve of their release of Hurting Each Other, reporter Dan Armstrong visited the duo in the studio as they fine-tuned aspects of recording that to his ear were barely detectable. To the average listener, quote, the song was already completed, and even those of us watching and listening were unable to perceive why the Carpenters would suddenly stop, say, no, that's not right, and start over again. Karen, I want to make the we are's huge. Richard, they are huge. Karen, I want to make them huger. Ironically, the queerest thing about the Carpenters, who were once asked point blank in a phone interview by a Toronto DJ if their songs were about incest. For fuck's sake. Quote, I know that Karen's singing them to you. I know they're about incest. You want to talk about this? Is their exacting normalcy and polished exemplarity. A, quote, nothing remarkable to see here, end quote, finely tuned into a thing a lot of people aren't even consciously aware they desire most. In other words, making, quote, easy listening wasn't easy, and being the poster girl for pop music normalcy would guarantee Karen herself would never lead a normal life, whatever that means. This insistence with which the word normal crops up, particularly from Karen's mouth, as their careers reach a certain plateau in the middle 1970s is telling. It's like a wishful incantation meant to bring something into being through its mere utterance. But as with love, the kind of deep, enduring, and sometimes even infuriating love sung to life in Karen's voice, normalcy could only exist in song, in the shadow world of performance. Early in Carpenter's career, in the white heat of their fame, the press surrounding them as decidedly mixed. For every puff piece manufactured by the A&M publicity machine and outlets like Teen Magazine, there were profiles and reviews that arranged them from merely skeptical to the outright snide and scathing. The legendary Rolling Stone critic Lester Bangs famously lambasted the Carpenters and their fans as creeps in his review of their sold-out concert in San Diego, 1971. Chief among his complaints was that the band's stage presence lacked a focal point, especially with Karen singing from behind a massive drum set. Oh my Jesus Christ. So, just doesn't give you much to look at, lovely and outgoing as she is. Bangs' remarks strikes me as sexist, insofar as the burden is placed on Karen, the lone woman on stage, lovely and outgoing as she is, to give audience members something to look at. This problem of having Karen behind the drums would continue to dog the Carpenters until she finally relented and assumed her proper place as lead singer in the spotlight at the front of the stage. Perhaps Karen had Lester Bangs' Rolling Stone's review in mind when she answered Johnny Carson's question on The Tonight Show about whether or not she missed sitting back there at the drums. They finally got the message across that they wanted me to get up. I was the only girl in the group, so they were looking at me. The dispersal of attention away from the lead singer to an amorphous group which broke with the conventions of live rock stadium performances prompted Bangs to declare that the Carpenters and their large backing ensemble were an odd and disjunct congregation, quote. The group made Bangs' girlfriend, his date to the show, nervous. Especially onerous to the couple was Richard's hokey, mechanical stage presence. Bangs mocks the pianist for lacking emotional depth despite his technical expertise. In quiet numbers, when the lighting was subdued and he was twinkling out pearly arpeggios, He would stare up and off into space with mournful, almost crossed eyes, as passionate as Chopin in the throes of creation. The classical writer, Chopin. Though Bang's review, Chopin, very Texas. Though Bang's review is one of the more colorful extreme end of criticism about the Carpenters, it underscores the fact that much of the backlash and ill will harbored against the duo was bound up with their rigorous and workmanlike approach to the style of music that was supposed to go down easy. Such impressions stemmed in part from various reporters. Close encounters with the band's protective managerial entourage, as well as the Carpenters' meticulous performance, prep, and recording practices, which took time away from more in-depth interviews. When Michael's profile of the Carpenters for the Chicago Tribune magazine in 1971 shrewdly captures at once the frenzy and disaffection of the duo's preparations for their Hollywood Bowl debut, he embeds a paragraph from A&M's publicity sheet in the middle of his own frustrated journalistic efforts to get to the real Carpenters, as a form of indictment by contrast. Quote, "Meet the Carpenters, A&M Records' young brother and sister hitmakers, whose gentle harmony, wholesome image, and natural unpretentious personalities have virtually crashed through to make them the nation's #1 recording team." End quote. Michaels, meanwhile, is thoroughly handled by the Carpenters' publicity crew, as he struggles to wrangle the duo for a brief interview amidst Richard's frazzled micromanagement of rehearsals and sound checks. His, quote, all-American shoulders tossing under a worried, boyish face. Michaels characterizes Karen as mopey, sad, and aloof, with the gaunt visage of an unhappy Jane Wyman. Throughout Michael's profile, the Carpenters come off as automatons, shielded by a swirl of compensatory gregariousness from their retinue of side musicians, hairstylists, roadies, and gophers. Michaels even attributes the awkward, slow-building standing ovation at the end of their Hollywood Bowl debut to Karen's hairdresser, who, quote, accomplishes mission impossible by pounding her palms together, giving filthy, resentful looks to anybody who dares remain seated, which is everybody. The only thing that briefly punctures Michael's cynicism about this famous duo of disaffected groups, and we only have 2 pages left. The only thing that briefly punctures Michael's cynicism about this famous duo of disaffected kids zipping in late to all the venues in their not-so-unpretentious Maserati is hearing Karen sing "For All We Know" during a sound check. Karen makes us believe it. She feels it. The sound system issues it superbly. Everything is right. A mood is created. Everybody forgets everything except the singer and the song. The Karen effect. The capacity to make you feel. The capacity to make you feel. You know, she could have ended the sentence right there. The capacity to make you feel. But it goes on. The capacity to make you feel something, to make you believe in a spiritual undoing, and trembling beneath the polished arpeggios and vacuum-sealed harmonies. In many respects, detractors like Bangs were right. The Carpenters were a little bit creepy. At least in a musical sense. Rhythmically, they were almost always too squarely on beat, leaving little room for falling behind in a soulful rubato. Their 1973 cover of Leon Russell's This Masquerade makes that plainly apparent, lending the song an odd cheeriness despite its minor modality and depressing account of a relationship that's just going through the motions. Richard's arrangements are like the streets of Disneyland, that provide the setting for their "Please, Mr. Postman" video. Disturbingly clean. As chief gearhead and maestro, Richard was so familiar with the minutiae of each of their recordings that he would clock which turntables at which radio stations ran fast or slow when they broadcast the band's hits. You can't help but wonder, to what extent is trying too hard? This strained effort beneath what is supposed to sound and appear effortless is symptomatic of their deeply ingrained class aspirations. After all, Agnes and Harold Carpenter settled on the wrong side of the tracks in South Downey, and were warned that doing so might not bode well for their future mobility. Jerry Dunphy, the legendary Los Angeles newscaster who inspired both Ted Baxter on The Mary Tyler Moore Show and Kent Brockman on The Simpsons, visited the Carpenters' home for a local TV special in 1972, just as several renovations were underway after Richard and Karen's first major chart triumphs. Dunphy explains that despite all the duo's smashing successes, they still live at home with their parents in the not especially fashionable community of Downey. Karen and Richard commented on how their working-class parents did everything they could to invest their musical needs. In their musical needs. From new electric pianos to drum sets, quality microphones and tape recorders, but sometimes they simply couldn't swing it. Last page and a half. Thanks for sticking with me if you're still here. Harold and Agnes could barely work enough hours to keep up with their bills. But through pluck, persistence, and hard work, they were able to carve out their own versions of a suburban paradise in Downey, enabled by their children's accomplishments, the gold records, the concerts at Carnegie, the Royal Albert Hall, the Hollywood Bowl, as the cover of Now and Then immortalizes in its trifold spread. ... I wanted our home, our life, to look as neat and glossy as the one that butterflied open so splendidly on the cover of the Carpenters album. Covetous of their neatly clipped lawn, ours was often weedy and overgrown. I also fantasized about the tidiness within that home, and about what would undoubtedly be unblemished. Brand new furniture, gleaming with pledge in each of the rooms. Our own suburban life was marred by my musician parents' well-intended but ill-equipped efforts to keep house. Something they never really had to do on the road. Gigging at five-star hotels with turned-down service, or living with my middle-class family in the Philippines, equipped with a full staff of nannies and other help. Their work ethic was a completely different species of hustle from Harold and Agnes Carpenters. And as a child, I couldn't experience it as anything other than an aberrant, when all I wanted, desperately, was to be normal. To fit in with our new surroundings. My nightly communion with the Finger Hut catalog filled me with longing for the spoils of suburban good life. Or at least the installment plan, mail-order version of it. Canopied beds, sensible rugs, stealth storage systems, to conceal the chaos and detritus of the everyday, became the stuff of fantasy for me amidst the piles of musical equipment, chords, charts, and stray percussion instruments that intermingled with the worn but functional mid-century furniture we had inherited from my grandmother, Marian. In my mind, cleanliness was the mark of prosperity. And so, like Richard and Karen, I too endeavored toward perfection, albeit perfection of a different kind, on behalf of my parents and the dreams I thought we shared in the suburbs that were supposed to furnish them for us. And that's the end of chapter 1, folks. We got through preface and through chapter 1, and I appreciate you looking in. I don't know if I'll read the whole thing out loud to you, but I do think that you should purchase it. I hope that this gave you enough information that you will go and buy it yourself. I love the term differently abled bodies, because we're all temporarily abled bodies. Most of us. At some point in our life, we will be differently abled. Some of us already are. Inside and out. And so for Karen Tongson to recognize that, and just to talk about how even though they're this rock duo that made the charts, that they had their own idiosyncrasies, that they had their own personalities and complexities and queerness about them. It's really, really important. That even if it looks like someone has it all, you never know what they're going through inside. You never know how people are struggling to pay their bills, what people are saying about them behind their back or to their faces. So just be nice, be kind, be loving, be empathetic, be guarded, have your boundaries, protect yourself. Okay, guys, thanks for tuning in, and I appreciate you. Let's close the circle, y'all. Imaginary vibraphone. Bling. Thanks, guys. How do I end this? Oh my god, I never know how to end this. Just kidding. Let's end on a smile.